Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Chip Lunch Podcast.
How dare you?
Just jump right in.
Did you see that? Did you see what he just did then? I usually run this podcast. That's really good. Well, no, go on. Let's see if you can do it any better.
Hi, everyone. Welcome to the Chip Lunch Podcast. I'm Ethan. This is Joel, and we have a fantastic guest along with us today. This is Grace. Hi, Grace.
Hello.
Hi, Grace. How you doing?
Good.
That's
Really
good.
Train delays getting here.
Train delays took me 2 hours to get here.
Oh, from
Sad times. From West Ryde.
really?
Joy.
That
Ooh.
is
Yeah.
upsetting. Do they say why it was delayed?
Something was happening around the town hall area. I can never really understand the technical side of things on the trains.
There's a train in front of the other train
That's
and it's
right.
not working.
Something about the signals.
And it doesn't help that the all the voices sound like it's not actually
It's really
helpful.
hard.
The next train is going to put up doors closing.
Kiraway.
Giving you a reason whether you can understand or not.
Yeah.
That's all right.
Excellent. The first question we ask Grace when people come on the Chip Lunch Podcast is, how do you like your chips?
Hot and
That's-
crunchy.
Hot and crunchy.
Yeah.
Texture is important.
Texture is very important.
This is
It
true.
gives a certain mouthfeel.
Mm-hmm.
Often with chicken salt, because I don't often get to eat chicken salt.
Yes.
But I was also thinking for something a little bit more different.
Mm-hmm.
There are different kinds of salt, like seaweed salt or kimchi salt.
Wow.
What?
Love it. Okay, please delve into this in more detail for us.
I think when you go into some of those fusion places and they like to do something just a little bit different, they go, oh, instead of the classic stuff, let's change it up a bit. And when you're looking at the menu, you go, oh, that's interesting. I wonder how that tastes. And it sounds like it could be pretty appealing. So you get sort of lured into ordering something just to try it out.
So it's not necessarily something you really like. It's just something that you would like to like?
Oh, I ended up trying them
Oh,
and
okay.
I did like them.
Oh, okay, nice.
Okay.
But I think when I look at the menu and see a new kind of salt or a new flavor, it is very appealing to try it out.
I get that.
You like to try new things like that. Is that what you mean? Okay.
Yeah.
I do that whenever I see pasta on a menu at a
Yeah.
restaurant. I pick the pasta that I can't pronounce or I haven't seen before. I'm like, that one looks really Italian.
Yeah.
And so I'll go for that.
It's all Italian.
I know, but some looks more Italian
Very
than others.
classic.
I'll have the fettuccine.
Well, like apparently bow ties is just
Fusilli.
it's just
Fusilli.
which just means bow ties. So it's still bow ties. But yeah,
There you
there you go.
Imagine how much effort it is to make a fusilli / bow tie
Oh yeah,
than
Heaps.
just chopping up a fettuccine.
fully
Yeah.
outrageously
Hard
different. Sorry to
I love this diversion.
devolve into pasta talk, but yes. Anyway, I am a pasta. That happens. Joel,
Double meanings all over the place.
Joel, I've been stealing your job. Do you want to continue from here?
Yes, sure. I was just going to ask that. So, would you eat seaweed salt or what was the other one? Seaweed
Yeah, what was
salt.
Kimchi. So,
Kimchi.
you know, the Korean side dish, which they eat with sort of every meal.
It's like a fermented.
It's a
thing, isn't it?
fermented, often cabbage, but
Yep.
it can be all sorts of different vegetables. And it has a quite pungent smell, but it tastes really nice. A little bit spicy, a little bit sour.
And you have had it on hot chips? Is that what you're saying?
I've had the salt, so they
Yes,
kind of
not-
distill it into a flavor or salt
Yeah,
and then
okay.
put it on chips.
Wow, that's cool.
Yeah.
Anyway, cool. Any particular place you like to go for your chips that you're like, I want to go back there and get my chips?
I don't really remember where I've had really good chips, so I think I'm often just going to a place and pleasantly surprised when they when they turn out well.
Oh, there's chips here. That's great. And they're good.
Yeah.
Cool. Well, the second question that we always ask, and this is one that I'm really looking forward to the answer to, is how did you become a Christian, Grace?
I think one sort of key theme I see is that struggle for belonging in my life. And that's, I guess, something that has really driven me towards God, where I find a great sense of belonging in God's family. So in thinking about belonging, why that's such a big deal for me, I think, I came from Singapore when I was a kid, then grew up in Australia, but went to a German school. So it's all a mixed
Solid.
bag of things.
Yeah.
So never felt like I identified particularly with any part or really belonged anywhere. And I did have Christian influence in my life quite early on. So my parents took me to church, me and my sister Michelle, and we went pretty much every week quite consistently. But for me, it was just another thing to go to. And because I still had this wrestling with what does it mean to belong, it just felt like, I treat church like a hobby rather than belong there. And so this continued on, and in high school, I stopped going to church because it didn't give me that sense of belonging, and I was looking for other friends, and I thought, if I go to Chinese school, then I would find new friends there, and perhaps if they're Chinese, they'll identify more with me and I with them, and church was just something that could be swapped out for something else because it was just a hobby or an interest, and I could find another interest. So I sort of like continued on with life, and at university was a time that I got to kind of stop and think and wrestle with bigger questions. I'd always had that niggling feeling of maybe I should go back to church, but I have other things that I need to do in my life and that I want to prioritize, like my studies. So I kind of just left it hanging, but at university it was sort of a new starting point. There was an overwhelming sort of load of people. I went to UNSW and my commerce lectures would have like 1,000 people, and you kind of not keep track of people, and unless you made the point to kind of be friends and let's keep hanging out together, you would see one person one day and then not the next. And I guess in my law lectures it was smaller, but still that sense of floating around a little bit. So I thought I'll join the Christian group to make some good friends. And I know something of Christianity. It would be good as well to kind of start thinking about God again and what it means if I call myself a Christian but don't go to church and not sure whether I believe whether this is true or not. And then when I joined a Bible study as part of the law faculty, I was very surprised when I saw that people were very consistent in the way they lived out their life according to God's word. They would really care for people. Things were busy as a law student, but they would just go out of their way to love and support other people. And at the same time, they took what was said in the Bible as truth and really seriously. And I was like, I'm not that familiar with that sort of approach. And that piqued my curiosity. And there were often times where I didn't want to go to Bible study again because academics were competing priorities. But then I thought, something just held me there. People were wanting to catch up with me, to read the Bible, to hear about my life, to pray with me. And then there came this time where there was a mid-year conference, which is where something like 700, 800 uni students who are Christian or exploring Christianity would go away together with campus Bible study. And it's 5 days of lots of Bible input, lots of time with people who are Christian or exploring. And so it just made me stop and think. And it was quite confronting because it's like, do you want to live God's way? And I think at the time there were just other competing priorities, which meant, I'm not sure whether I'm ready to let go. And is following Jesus that good that I'm willing to let go of those things and allocate my time and resources differently? I think there wasn't one point where I became Christian. It was really more and more the evidence that came before me, the love I experienced from people, what I read in the Bible became more and more true and made more and more sense. And so that gradual compilation of things meant that I reached a point where I would just go, yeah, it's pretty normal and natural to call myself a Christian, and I'm fully convicted by this. And I think that's where I also felt, wow, that sense of maybe belonging was perfectly fulfilled by God. Like I still struggle with it. And there are times where I keep needing to tell myself the gospel truth again about you belong to Jesus because he saved you, and it's unconditionally saved you, not because of what you've done or who you are or present to be. And so I think that was a great sense of relief because I didn't need to pretend I belonged somewhere or work really, really hard at belonging somewhere. And that made me much more relaxed as a person.
Yeah, right. How old were you when you made, like, though you felt like you were fully convicted?
Probably around 18 to 20. So 18 was where I started exploring a bit more.
Yeah, okay.
And then it took maybe 2 or 3 years. Yeah.
And do you think that you've mentioned that sense of belonging a lot? Was that, do you think that and you also said there was a sense of relief. Was that because it's like, was it, you said you also struggle with belonging too. So my question, I suppose I'm getting it a bit tangled up, but I was just fascinated to see that you felt relieved. And I think that was, did you feel like you didn't have to keep trying to find that?
Yeah, definitely. So I think I could, like looking back in hindsight, I could see that I was trying really hard at school through academic achievements to go, I have a place here in the school. Like, I'm this random Asian kid in a German school. There's something not quite right here, it felt like. Although people were very welcoming, the teachers put a lot of effort to help me, especially in the early years, to get that language going. But there was still a sense of, I'm not sure whether I belong here, and so I better work really hard to belong here.
And I suppose you moving around a lot, I was just going to ask you in regards to that, like what was the path that your family took? Because I've met your dad. Yeah. And he's a lovely guy. Yeah. What's his name again though? I've forgotten his name. Gerald. Yeah. Gerald. Okay, yeah, Gerald. Fantastic. Thank you for reminding me. Sorry, Gerald, that I forgot your name.
Special shout out to him.
Yeah, shout out. We love you, Gerald.
We love you, Gerald.
Yeah, he's awesome. Yeah. The question was, because I think he's originally from China, is that right? And then he went via Singapore and Malaysia?
Sort of vaguely. So like family is complicated because they're from all over the place.
Okay.
So one side of grandparents were from China. They migrated to Malaysia. Then dad grew up in Malaysia. Then came to Australia to study. Studied at the same UNSW.
Yep, that's right.
And apparently we had the same commerce lecturer at some point.
Oh, wow, he must be old. Or he actually must be very old.
That's right, he was. I was like, oh yeah, we're talking about the same person. And then he went back to Malaysia, then went to Singapore to work because job prospects there were better. And then met Mom in Singapore. Okay. But Mom was from Taiwan originally and migrated to Singapore as a high school student with her family. And then when Dad and Mom got married, I was born in Singapore, but we migrated to Australia when I was 3, and Michelle was born here.
Right. Okay, cool.
So,
where does the German school come into it?
Yeah,
why was that?
Yeah, why did you go to a German school?
Well, there was a German school in Ryde, so I was like, oh, it's around the corner. I guess the story is that we were put on an Australian school waiting list.
Right.
And I was already 5.5 by that time. And my parents were like, oh, it's time for you to go and socialise with other kids, learn stuff. There's a school nearby that seems quite family-oriented and very thoughtful. And at the time, Dad was also working for a German company, so I guess he had German colleagues and there was some influence there. I thought, why not? And maybe there's even the chance of picking up another language.
Which is just one of many for you, right? How many languages do you actually speak?
I can speak 4.
So can you list them off for us?
So German, French, English, and Mandarin Chinese.
Wild. But like German and French they have some similarities, right? But then like Mandarin is a big jump between
Mandarin
the two.
is the most sort of distinctive from the other 3. So I think at school I felt like that was the hardest one.
Right. So you were learning Mandarin at school?
I was learning that at home. So growing up meant that you went to a German school, you did everything in German, including maths, sciences, geography, history, all of that. And then you go home and then Mom would give us Chinese homework to do. So we're like, why are we doing Chinese homework while other kids can go and play? But it was really, really helpful like in the long run because I can now share Jesus with Mandarin speakers.
Absolutely. That's what's cool about it. You spoke about like how academics is really important to you and probably still is, which is fine. Not judging you on that, sorry. But is that where it originally came from? Like your parents wanting to do really well academically, or is it more driven by yourself?
I think it was both. So initially, I think parents pushed it a fair bit, not sort of in an overbearing sense. There is definitely an Asian stereotype that goes, you get 99.5% on your assignment, and they go like, where's the 0.5%? Rather than going, great job and you're a genius. Maybe you can improve on that. They weren't so much like that. They would always want me to improve and grow. And so they would also help me work on the areas I had weaknesses on. And I would also get extra maths and English and other things like homework on top of the school homework. So I think they were pretty ambitious. They wanted me to do my best. But I think they realized at a point where I was in primary school that I already pushed myself really hard. And they sort of ended up trying to comfort me or help me not take things as seriously because they knew that I was so stressed about things.
Was that a really helpful shift? Like, did that shift of theirs, when they noticed you were struggling, pushing yourself a little bit too hard, did that help you with your feeling less pressure, or did you keep up that for quite a while after?
I think I'm pretty good at giving myself pressure. And so like I would then argue with them why I should give myself more pressure rather than being fully convinced by what they say. So I'm like, yep, great, but I still need to pass this exam or I still need to do well in order to do X, Y, and Z.
And I was just going back to what you're saying, like it's an immigrant, or you said an Asian thing, but I think it's a lot of immigrants take the risk of coming over. I mean, I remember talking to Jabish when his family came from India, and I can kind of understand the pressure to do well, because it's like, we've got to make this work. Like, we've taken this risk to move to another country where we know very little people, and we're going to an area we don't know anyone. Our children are going to a German school. Like, we got to make this work. And I think that's what's missed. Like, you spoke about a stereotype, but I think that's often what's missed within people that have come to this country, is that they've got to make it. They want to make it work. They can see that Australia is a place that they want to live, but it's like, oh well, we got to make this work. So you got to make sure that you get a uni degree and all that kind of stuff, because then we know that you are secure. You have the security of staying in a reasonably stable job in a pretty stable country, and that's better for our life as a family, I think.
Yeah,
so
definitely.
Just to validate that is like, I don't want to always talk about a stereotype. It's like that's why so many people that have come to Australia are doing that, because they're like, we're going to make it. We've got to make this work anyway.
I think security is such a huge theme as well. And so it doesn't matter what background you're from. Like, I think we're all seeking for security. It might just look different. Like, the symptoms might look different. And so just working out, what does that look like in my life? Where am I particularly insecure in my life? And then how does God address that insecurity? And where do I find security in Him instead? That is such a relieving and such a liberating thing.
And what was that for you? Like, you're talking about everyone needs to feel secure, I think. What was that for you? What made you feel insecure, do you think?
Being different made me feel a little bit insecure. I mean, like, school is great, but there would also be kids who like tease you and go, oh, you're a bit different. And there were some like minor things that just made you feel, oh, I actually don't belong here. And when you feel like you don't belong, that makes you feel insecure too. Like, I don't have a place here.
Also, when you've moved, you know that you've moved from a country that you were born in as well. That would add to it as well, that belonging. I
think so. And like, just like appearance-wise, you look different. What you bring for lunch is different. And people are like, what is that gross stuff you're eating? And you're like, this is my delicious lunch.
What was it? What was your delicious lunch that you brought?
Well, Mum always put a lot of effort into making our lunches, and she would often like if it was sandwiches, it might be a more complicated sandwich rather than just ham and cheese. She would put like a really typically sort of Asian thing is pork floss. Like, they would fry it. They put like maybe sesame seeds and seaweed, and it's very fragrant.
That sounds delicious.
And then they'd put it she'd put it in the sandwich with some, butter. Other things would be like, she'd actually cook meat and slice it, and then put vegetables and all of that and layered it up. So it's like a complex meal. And I think there's some like YouTube videos. There's some comedians now who are emphasizing that Asian sort of intriguing, unique kind of thing. And so there's actually a really funny YouTube clip of this, like, Asians bringing their lunch to school. So that kind of reminded me of when Mum used to pack sort of elaborate lunches compared to the roll-ups or the chips that other kids would get.
I remember, I think my godfather, who lives in Canberra, and he made a point of that a family of Greek background moved into him, and they're like, we'd never seen olives before. They didn't know what olives or olive oil or anything. Like, it's very similar, right?
Yeah.
It's like, but I think that's for the better of Australia. Like,
Oh,
if we're just
yeah.
talking about food, man, there's so much great Asian food. There's so much great Greek food, Italian food. You've already
We
spoken
talked about
about.
Italian food.
I need like 17 different types of pasta.
That's
Like,
it.
I think it's just fantastic. Anyway,
Oh yeah.
can you just tell us about school, like what it was like for you at school, Grace? So you already said that you probably didn't feel belonging and everything was done in German, which I still find a bit difficult to believe. Well, not difficult to believe, difficult to know how I would cope with that. Did you enjoy school, or was it just got to be academic and got to get out of here as quickly as possible?
It was a bit of a mix. So I really enjoyed school when I was doing really well. So when I was performing well. I also did have some really close friends at that time and just loved that. So I remember as a kid, there were times where I'd get sick and then I'd be really upset that I couldn't go to school. But I think the constant pressure that I gave myself meant that school wasn't as enjoyable as it could have been.
Yep.
So an example would be like I just stress out so much about an upcoming maths exam that instead of like enjoying the learning and just going, what possibilities could come out of knowing maths well, I would just be really stuck and focused on getting the marks.
And do you think that hindered your learning? Because I feel like I did that in my HSC. Like I stressed about it so much that I actually didn't study well and then didn't do as well as I wanted to in the HSC. Was it the same for you?
I think from a marks perspective, I probably would have done the same regardless, but I think studying is so much more than just achieving marks. Like marks are in a sense an arbitrary way of determining a certain standard, whereas there's so much that's not measurable as well that is very beneficial. And so I think I missed out on a lot of that, going, I just could have explored some great ideas, had a lot more fun, and just thought a lot more personally rather than just mechanically going through the steps.
It's a difference between, isn't it, like just be able to regurgitate the information.
That's right.
But also like synthesize it and make it and like kind of expand your mind. Is that what we're doing? Expanding our mind?
Exactly.
Yeah. So then after school, how did you do in the HSC? Did you do as well as you wanted to?
Yes and no. Like I did the International Baccalaureate.
What's that?
Which is
What is that?
it's like an international form of the HSC.
Right.
And we did that because we had a lot of overseas students who were from Germany or other parts of Europe. They came here, so it's more transferable for them if they want to go home to do university.
Right.
So we did that instead. So I did well, but perhaps I had high expectations of myself.
Yeah, right.
And also when teachers are sort of talking you up and you're going, yeah, I'm really great, then you kind of get really disappointed when things don't go exactly as you planned.
And you were disappointed? Like,
I think for a period of time I was a little bit, but then I think as I grew in maturity and as a Christian, I'm like, does that really matter or not?
yeah. And I guarantee you probably got are you willing enough to tell us your actual mark?
That's so rude.
I'll tell you mine. That's all.
We can talk about
I can't remember mine. And mine was a lot
Probably a
closer
good
than
thing.
yours.
Yeah.
Well, it was out of 45, so and
okay.
then that sort of transfers over into, at the time, UAI,
Yeah, right.
which is now ATAR or TER or something.
Yeah,
That's
ATAR.
ATAR. I think.
ATAR now,
Yeah.
So I got 43, but I think people were predicting that I get 45. So
Right.
it's that expectation.
Yeah.
It is really good that you clarified that it's out of 45 beforehand. Because the ATAR's out of 90.
Yeah.
Out of 100.
100,
But no
isn't
one gets to 100.
You
It's
can't
all
get
90.
100,
You
can
can't
you?
get 100. You can get 99.9. But
Yeah, you used to be able to get 100,
Can't get 100.
and now you can't get 100
Yeah.
anymore for the UAI or
Doesn't make sense to me.
ATAR.
My
Yeah.
UAI was 72.95, I think. So probably not as good as 43 out of 45.
The conversion rate at that time was something like 99.75. So
You're awesome.
it was good.
It
So,
was really good.
that's so good.
I think we can often have a picture in our mind of what we think we should achieve.
Yeah.
And so I think being very achievement driven at that time meant that was a disappointment rather than something to celebrate, even though perhaps the majority of people would go, no, Grace, that is pretty good.
That's pretty good,
Yeah.
man.
And I think a thing
It's very
from
good.
like becoming a Christian is that like at that point in time, that would have resulted, like doing really well, resulted either in pride or like in deep anxiety or that sense of failure. But I think now, like I'm slowly shifting, still working on it, but slowly shifting to not be determined by my achievements. Like pride is something that doesn't please God, and what we can do really comes from Him. So instead of giving kudos to ourselves, it's really, this is a gift that God's given me. Let me use it to His glory and to serve other people. And likewise, when I don't do so well, I think now I'm more freed up to go, I'm not defined by it. I'm not seeking sense of security or belonging through it. It's just something that I've tried and it didn't quite work out the way I expected, but I can either try again or go, I've tried really hard and that's just not my area, but it doesn't define me.
I agree with you, and I think I also find it helps you enjoy the thing that you're doing more as well.
Absolutely, yeah.
And in a way, helps you, if you're studying or whatever, it helps you study more effectively.
Yeah.
But also almost, and because I was someone pretty achievement oriented as well, I think, but also makes you, I was also a procrastinator. So like I had these high expectations, but then there was this work that I didn't want to do.
Yep.
And I found that as I've become more mature as a Christian, those two things have come closer together.
Yeah.
So then I actually end up doing as well as I would like to, almost as well as I would like to do, but also I enjoyed a lot more and I learn a lot better. Like we're talking about, just it wasn't just regurgitating information. It was now I can actually get this. And I think that's a real gift that God gives us, is that in the way that we learn is it's not an exceptional result, but it's an exceptional way to help. He helps us understand stuff better. I don't know if you can pass that better for me.
My only addition to that is that I think as a really good example that I like to think about and like to use is that my school that I went to at high school, our slogan is measure by achievement. And I think that is really unhelpful. And yet is also a really interesting insight of what our whole society does. It's not just individuals. It's not just the personal, I need to get these marks because I'm pushing myself. But it's actually a societal, we measure you by what you achieve. Joel and I are reading, and Joey, one of the pastors here, are reading a book at the moment called The Rise and Triumph of the Modern Self. And in that, the author there talks about schools no longer being places where we learn how to fit into the world, but instead schools are places where we perform
and express our individualism.
And express our individualism. And we got to perform against each other and perform to each other because it's about our individualism now. And that's the really interesting thing that Christ rocks up and goes, no, it's actually not about, your individualism is important, but it's actually not about your achievement because nothing you do gets you into heaven. You do nothing well. Like it's quite blunt and a little bit and really hard to swallow sometimes. My wife, who has been on this podcast, Katie, is a self-professed perfectionist. And she and she has spent a lot of her testimony is going, I had to wrestle with the idea of being a perfectionist who was striving to get everything right and realizing that I can't. And that's kind of the whole point. And I think it's a really interesting polar opposite that our world goes, we measure by achievement, or we measure by your performance, or we measure by that. And Jesus goes, we don't, just follow me. And I think it's really cool hearing your story thus far and seeing a lot of that and a lot of those societal, cultural clashes happening with Christianity, and also not even a clash. I don't know what I'm trying to say. I'm trying to say that I don't know. Let's turn it into a question. The Grace was as you were figuring out that from 18 to 20 or whatever, and how that you said that helped you with your belonging concepts and stuff you were thinking through. Those struggles. What exactly about the gospel that helped with that stuff, with belonging and achieving and that jazz that we've just been unpacking?
I think the fact that we are all sort of fallen before God, so we actually all, in some sense, don't belong to God.
Yeah, right.
It was like, wow, okay, like it's really not by our own achievements that we belong. Even though our world tells us, like, you've got a place here because you are awesome and you've done this and you have achieved that. Or like you're a certain personality and you're really funny and you belong. Like, I think like just feeling like really out of place and uncool just meant that, oh, I don't belong and other people do belong. But I think the gospel speaks into the fact that we, in one sense, all are like insecure about ourselves or feeling that there's something not right in the world. There's a sense of brokenness and not belonging. But the sense that even though we are so fallen and broken in God's eyes, he wants to have a relationship with us and fixes that through sending Jesus to this world to pay the price for our wrongdoing, our, you know, the shame that we've brought upon him, the way that we've treated God so terribly, but yet he says, I'm going to restore this broken relationship through someone else, through Jesus, not by your own sort of problem solving or fixing the world. And I think that is both humbling, like you go, wow, I can't do anything about it, but also really relieving, because you know that there is some sense of like, I don't always have to get it right. The reality is I'll never fully get it right. And also the fact that once it's not by your merit that you belong and that you're treated as worthy, like your sense of self-worth just doesn't change anymore. You don't have to like grasp hold at it. And people do all sorts of crazy things just to like have that sense of self-worth, like whether it's being the richest person, being the funniest person, being, you know, the best at everything. And I think I tried to do that through achievement, and that often meant that I think when we're talking about the whole individualistic kind of society measuring you by your merits, that drove me apart from other people, because I would always compare myself to other people. And when people did really well, it's actually something worth celebrating, because it's like, wow, there's this really smart person who can benefit society. But I would feel jealous, envious, and not able to be happy for that person. So it actually wedged relationships apart. And so I guess finding my sense of self-worth in Jesus meant that, wow, okay, I belong regardless of how well I do or who I am. And that frees me up to then reach out to other people and be open to other people when they reach out to me, because I don't need to struggle for my sense of self-worth or belonging.
Clip that.
Clip that. That was actually a really good clip. We'll make sure we clip that.
I wasn't like, it was a funny joke.
Clip it.
But do that.
It can mean cut it. Or
No.
I thought that's what he was saying.
No.
Get rid of that.
No. Let's condense that and put it on the internet.
But just like a few things that we've actually been talking about, also, we were talking about how when we accept Jesus, he makes us feel valued, like you're saying, that we get better at learning and not just regurgitating the stuff as well. But then also that drove a wedge between you and some other people. It's also like looking at the way that we learn when we're a Christian, and knowing that we're valued actually helps us to be a gift to other people as well. And I think that might be the bit that you're talking about in terms of being a wedge. Instead, now you're like, oh, I can support that person who's just done an amazing job. They'll do the same to me. But then we're also, because we're learning in this way, we can actually be a gift and blessing to other people as well. And I think that's what I was trying to talk about however many minutes ago, was that I think you talking about that has now made me realise, that's how we can look at our learning and academics or anything. And when we're reading the book that we're reading, I highly recommend that book, by the way. It's one of the best books I've ever read.
It's really
read
good.
of it.
Yeah. Well, just to be able to know that God's actually working through us all one way or another. And I think that's what we're getting from your story so far, Grace, is he waited to that very point to know that, to show you that actually no achievement is not the number one priority. I am. And this is how we can change that. You can still enjoy doing that stuff, but you can just love other people by having that self-worth that you're talking about that he provides. And I think that's just a lovely story, because that's why we definitely need to clip it, right?
Oh, yeah. Fully.
What was When you went to uni, so was it a commerce and law degree?
Yep.
Is that right? What was the thinking behind that? Do you plan to become a lawyer or it's just like, this is what I should do? I should do it, first of all, double degree. Is that what you have to do when you get 43 out of 45? Is a double degree?
It's more of not knowing what to do, so you do as many things as you can, maybe. But yeah, I think I didn't know what to do after high school. I knew I really liked languages, so that was a thing. But I guess I didn't know what I could do with languages after uni. So in a sense, there was like a practical aspect. What do I do post-uni? So my mum, I think it was, suggested law. And she's like, oh, you know, great general knowledge. You kind of know how the world works. And I think that was quite wise of her. With commerce, I was choosing between commerce and like arts languages. But I knew that I'd study arts, so languages in my own free time, which I do now. But I knew that I wouldn't spend time understanding money and the way it can be a really helpful gift and how it works. And how it can be also a very dangerous tool or weapon. And so I think I just needed to go, how can I be wise with my money? And I think studying commerce gave me a better sort of foundational understanding of it.
When you said you didn't know what to do, did you have any ideas, or it's just like, I have to go to uni and this will be best? I knew
uni was the next step. I think maybe just that's because that's what was talked about all the time. That's what everyone did.
Yes.
Although now looking in hindsight, there's such a big range of things you could do post high school. But
that's something we've talked about previously on the podcast.
Cool, yeah. But I think for me, that was just the natural kind of, that's your next step.
Yeah.
I think I had so many different ideas and options, and I didn't understand enough of how the world worked. My world was just studying and doing my own little thing.
And is it understanding yourself as well, like what you actually like doing? Did you feel like you weren't at that point either?
Yeah, I think maybe at that time I was too young, too insular maybe, and so I needed to get to uni to start thinking for myself and then starting to understand how the world works.
And you became a Christian at like kind of through university mission or university ministry, I should say. And it's a little bit different to some of the stories like Braden or myself or Ethan and some other people were like, oh, we didn't like uni. Like we just wanted to get out of there, which is funny. And we didn't really participate in uni ministry very much. And I think that was partly because of the amount of stuff that we would do. We're doing it at our own church as well. So that would be part of it. But I just like, can you educate us to people on why university ministry is really important and really helpful wasn't for us, but for you, for yourself and other people?
Yeah, I think uni was a really good time of growth. It was where I started thinking for myself rather than just regurgitating what other people told me.
Awesome.
And there was lots of flexible time in between because you would have classes and you have breaks in between. A lot of people tried to pack everything really tightly. But I think as I went throughout uni, I saw the value of building relationships at uni and the wonderful teaching and training you get at uni because they pitched it at a university level. So they challenged us in our thinking. There was a lot of time together. And so I think some of my closest friends, Christian friends, were from uni as well. And it was a time of growing together and spending time discussing random ideas and how does this truth from the Bible speak into our lives and how is it relevant for us? So I think it was quite an intensive kind of time of being able to learn God's word and learn it both, I guess, reading the text itself, but also on a systematic kind of level and thinking about ethics and how God's word shapes our Christian ethics.
Because that all comes up at uni anyway,
It does, yeah. So those kind of ideas that are starting to form in a young adult's mind then sort of get informed as well by the Christian faith.
That's cool.
Yeah, that's super. That's really cool. And we could clip that too.
Clip it.
Clip it, Dave. No,
that's the title of the episode. Clip it.
Yeah, that's really cool and really encouraging. And I sometimes think that I think if I had not been doing lots at church, I would have been trying to get involved like that too. Because I think it is really important, and it's a fantastic time because there's lots of people who are like yourself who are getting to uni and thinking for the first time, like not for the first time ever thinking, but like
Being challenged.
But being challenged challenging their thinking for the first time, and being willing to explore those challenges. And I think it's really, really important. But Grace, you went into uni not really sure what you were doing. How did you come out of uni? What was next?
Next was like the natural step was full-time work.
Yep.
And I think like in your 4th or 5th year, like final year at uni, you kind of think, I need to start finding a job and one that like an internship so that you could become a lawyer. So I think that was my natural sort of inclination because I was more interested in law than commerce. So I did the same thing as everyone else, sort of applied for lots of different law firms, but they were corporate law firms. Even though I wasn't particularly interested in the area, it was okay, but everyone was doing it. So I was like, I think I have to do it too, because otherwise I'll fall behind or I'll be out of the norm again. So that's where I think sense of belonging is challenged again. Once you become a Christian, it's not just everything is fixed, but these things come back to sort of niggle at you and you continue working through it. So I think that was another point of challenge, and I was quite upset when I then wasn't successful in getting an internship. But then I went, I'm actually really interested in criminal law. So I think just called them up or emailed this firm that looked really interesting. And one of the partners, or both of them, were Christian as well. So I was like, how does that work? Like, you're Christian, you do criminal law. And then they said, we'd love to kind of help train you or give you an insight. But what would be more helpful to you is if you went and observed us in court and doing lots of different things. You wouldn't be very productive, so you wouldn't generate income for the firm. So we can't really pay you, but would you like to do some work experience with us? And so I did work experience with them, then continued on as a paralegal part-time. Actually, fun story, that's where I met Nick Breen, because he was a lawyer there.
Really?
Yeah.
There you go. Nick is one of the guys at our church. He comes along on Saturday nights.
Yeah.
No, because of Yarrawarra.
He does go to Yarrawarra. Does he not come on Saturday at all now?
No. I think Yarrawarra is their main gathering.
Well, I hang out with him at Yarrawarra.
Yeah, cool.
So,
Yeah, cool. So I was like surprised to see a familiar face when I walked into Soul Revival, I think a long time ago on Saturday evening. Yeah.
Oh, he was definitely here when I think you first come.
Yeah, before Yarrawarra started.
That's right,
So I did that for a while, but didn't end up being able to have a job as a graduate lawyer there. So then applied for another job, and that's where I really, really enjoyed myself being in law.
Lawyer lifestyle.
Yeah, no, it was very different again.
Work hard, play hard.
I was great skills, but I was. What was I doing? Now I've lost my train of thought.
Oh, sorry.
No, all good.
You were being a lawyer.
I was being a
lawyer. You were working
lawyer.
hard and playing hard.
That's right. I applied for a job, which then meant that I worked for government, and there was a particular area in government in this legal team that looked after like investigations into deaths and disappearances and fires and all those things that like would happen that usually should not happen. Like we want to promote the safety through the systems, and instead of going, okay, it's one person's fault or attributing fault by itself, it was more of an investigative, so what went wrong here and how can we make recommendations to improve the system. But in order to do that, you needed to pull a lot of different parties together, everyone who's involved in this. So it was a very, very interesting role, and almost made me go, do I really want to go into vocational full-time paid ministry or not?
Really?
Because it was, a lot of fun.
Just before we get into your decision between ministry and work, what was what's the like? Is there like a case or something that you worked on at that particular law firm that really stood out to you and you really enjoyed?
Oh, there were so many. I think it's so diverse because there's so many ways things can go wrong and deaths can occur.
Yep.
But I think maybe one that stood out because I'd been working on it for a fair bit of time, and because I worked with someone that I really enjoyed working with, it was like, oh, we need to spend a lot of time, but we're doing this together. It was, so briefly outlining the case, multiple people had died because they had consumed lots of prescription drugs.
Okay.
And they mixed it all together, and they somehow got hold of a lot of these drugs. And so it's like, oh, how did you get hold of that? And what they did was they actually went around to different doctors. So they call it prescription shopping.
Yep.
And they tell the doctor, oh, I really need these pain meds. So because there's a flaw in the system where the doctors might not be talking to each other, or the pharmacies might not be linked together, so they go, oh, this person's in pain, naturally I would prescribe drugs to alleviate that. And then they would go around to different pharmacies collecting all these different prescription drugs. And so in the end, consuming too much of that and passing away. And that had happened to 4 or 5 different people. So you're looking at different people's stories, and then you're looking at the different parties involved, like the doctors, the chemists, and the overall pharmaceutical body. And I think it's just fascinating to go, well, who was all involved, what went wrong, and yeah, ultimately it was so tragic, but to go, okay, is there something we could do with the system to make it better for future people, that this won't happen again?
And were you able to make those changes?
So we only have powers to make recommendations, which then I think trickle through to the different bodies and different systems.
So did any come to fruition? Did you see them get put in place or not?
I'm not sure how direct the links were, but things like, when people have a register, I think a database where all these things get recorded, I think that was one of the recommendations that were made. So you can see this person has gone to all these pharmacies and all these doctors.
And these particular drugs.
Exactly, yeah. So how that got implemented, I didn't get to see or whether it got implemented and to what extent. Sometimes there'll be sort of concessions, like people will go, oh yeah, we'll do some of this, but not all of this.
Yeah. But that's a way of using your abilities and gifts to still try and help people. Yeah. Which I think is obviously, you became a Christian at university, but even as you're maturing as a Christian, and I would surmise, I would guess that you would wanted to do that more and more as you became more mature as a Christian. Would that be, am I putting words in your mouth there or something, or was that you definitely wanted to keep going down that line? Yeah,
I think the first thought that was planted in my mind was at the end of uni, where they had this looking into full-time ministry, and they went, wouldn't it be great to, and they sort of presented what it could look like, what we should be starting to think about. And I thought, yeah, okay, I'll do a 5-year plan. 5 years down the track, after I've established myself as a lawyer a bit more, I'll do that.
That's very similar to Joey's story.
Yeah, I think so. You kind of have maybe milestones that you want to hit or things that you want to achieve before you go down that track. And the other thing is, I think I heard from a lot of older, wiser people, including my parents, that you have no life experience at all. How are you going to help other people think through life questions? Okay. And work is a very big part of our lives. So if you had some work experience, it'll be really, really helpful as you try and come alongside other people.
Definitely. And so when's that leap towards ministry happening for yourself, and why are you thinking that? Because you said just before I asked you the question about your favourite case, was that you were considering ministry at that time. Yep. What was your thinking around that time, and why did you decide to do it and decide to make a change?
One of the big things was the idea of sharing Jesus. If the message is true and so beautiful and so urgent in some sense, then we need to tell people about it. And how do we do that? Well, there are people around us. And I felt just really convicted to share this most important thing in life with the people around me. And I was encouraged by university as we left to go, you need to think about your workplace as well as a place that has people who don't know Jesus, and how are you going to share the good news with them? You see them every day, you work on projects with them, you might have lunch with them, so they're your natural kind of interactions. And so I was praying for people and praying that I would be able to make connections with people so that I can share Jesus with them. But at the same time, I was someone who's very shy in the workplace. And so I was like, often my natural tendency would be to just hold back and just keep to myself. To the extent that I think in my performance review, my boss said, Grace doing a good job, but it'd be great if she could mingle with other people a little bit more. So I think just working out, well, how do I share Jesus? Because it's so awkward in the workplace. Like, what if I get it wrong? What if workplace relationships are destroyed? What if people think I'm wasting my time and I should be working instead? And you are paid to do work. So in what way is it appropriate to share Jesus in the workplace? And so that's where I also got connected with City Bible Forum, which is where I now work. But at that time, I attended some of their training, some of their talks. And one of the things that was encouraged was an evangelistic prayer team. So different workers would get together in maybe groups of 5 to 7 and share how they're going with their work, but also how they're going with their colleagues and who we could be praying for. So I did that I got connected with a bunch of young workers, and we would just get together maybe fortnightly and share life and pray for one another. And I think I did have friends then or colleagues in the workplace that I started opening up to. So one small step was just asking someone, do you want to come to lunch with me? And then going, oh, it's actually possible because she said yes.
Yeah, that's great.
And then we had a great conversation. We shared more about our lives, not just about work. And I think when you discover stuff about the other person and they about you, it just flows quite naturally.
Yeah, fully.
And so that was like the first story, but there were many after that where natural conversations then led to, oh, like, do you have a faith? Or and they would ask the same, or what do you do outside of work?
Oh yeah.
I think
it's the what are you doing on the weekend?
Yeah.
Oh, I'm going to church is such a great that doesn't have to be that doesn't have to go anywhere, but at least that's the little
you plant little things, right? Like low key things rather than, oh, you should come to church with me.
Yeah,
it's
exactly.
more like I go to church and then down the track you go, I learned this at church or
fully.
it's really natural.
And was that the pressure to share Jesus with them? Was that kind of like, was that achievement, like the desire for achievement still lingering there for you? Like you I have to do this 100% right and get 100% marked.
It definitely can feed into that. So it's a constant sort of battle internally going, my next step has to be to ask them to read the Bible, and whether or not they say yes or no also depends on how well I ask them.
Yeah, right.
So that does come back to haunt you in some sense, but then you have other people in your evangelistic prayer team or Christians in your circles reminding you that no, you're not defined by that, and you have no control over whether they'll say yes or no. You could ask in a better way, and there are better ways to ask than others. But ultimately, it's also the work of God and other people in their lives and the person themselves.
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah.
Do you have something, Heath?
Oh, I like. Well, on that, we're looking at church at the moment. We're looking through Acts, and Acts is a really cool example. We literally just started, and so Pentecost happened, and we talked about the Holy Spirit and how. I just had a funny realization of, you look at the disciples through the Gospels, and they so constantly just don't get it. They're not all there on getting stuff. And then they get the Holy Spirit, and Peter, who has been consistently not getting it, gets up and gives a sermon. And he gets up and he quotes Joel and a random psalm.
The prophet Joel.
Not this Joel. And it's just this really cool example of what we see when we do ministry now, where we're not actually doing it. Like it's happening. We are doing it, but the Holy Spirit is doing all the hard work. And so we just got to have those little conversations, right? And if it works, it isn't us. In the same way that our salvation isn't us. It's really cool. Just really quickly, what is the City Bible Forum?
It's a not-for-profit organization, so Christian organization that helps people, like workers in particular, to think about the bigger questions of life and to think about how faith informs life as well. So we help Christians to think about, well, what does it look like for my faith to inform my work, and also how to connect with my colleagues so that I can share Jesus with them. And for people who are not Christian, we kind of provide that safe space for people to have very open discussions and informed discussions about worldviews, faith, meaning of life, those kind of questions.
Yeah, awesome.
And there are people who are searching, and so we want to meet them where they're at.
Have you seen a lot of fruit from that?
Yeah, heaps. I think just seeing Christians themselves grow and going, actually, all these things at work, like our motto at church is Jesus changes everything, and it does even in the workplace. Like you think about office politics differently, you think about ambition differently, you think about how you earn money and how you use your money in a different way. Like all these things as a worker, they're really important. I just remember that sometimes there's this disconnect between the workplace and your faith for a lot of young workers, because they go, oh, you know, there's such a competition in the workplace. Like you have to get ahead, and in order to get ahead, you have to be a bit more aggressive, and that means stepping over some people, and that conflicts with my Christian faith. So in order to gain the outcome I want, maybe I have to just go the other way rather than following Jesus. Whereas I guess like we help young workers to work through what does it mean to have ambition and to do your best and do really well, and to also at appropriate times assert yourself, but to also be able to hold that together with loving your neighbor and loving your colleague and doing what's in the best interests of other people. And I think we often struggle to hold those two together rather than going one way or the other.
I mean, I think that would be really helpful, especially with like a lot of people that work in the city, that particular reason, because it is probably an environment that you're like more down the line of what you were saying is like, I need to get ahead, I need to earn more money, and I need to do all those kind of things. So I think that would be really helpful if I was in that particular situation. So that makes a lot of sense.
I guess the second part of that question of have you seen any fruit? Because that's probably the most exciting part is people have become Christian through it.
Awesome.
That's awesome.
So there's even someone from who comes to our West Ryde gathering who has read the Bible with one of my colleagues, and that's through a young workers connection. He's then become a Christian. He is looking for a church, and then he gets introduced to us.
That's fantastic. Well, speaking of the West Ryde gathering, so we actually planted a West Ryde gathering at Soul Revival, but I'd like to go back a little bit more of how you've been an integral part of planting that gathering as part of Soul Revival. But I'd like to go back and ask you how that started, because I think that's a really important story to tell, because both yourself and Ian in particular have been really big on pushing the gathering to happen.
Yeah.
But you actually started coming here to Soul Revival at Kirrawee first, right?
Yeah.
So please
tell that story
all the way back.
Yeah. That's what I said. I wanted to say the reason, like one of the reasons we have the West Ryde gathering is because of you. Yeah. But I want to take it all the way back and see where it started from.
Yeah, obviously where it started from, I wasn't even thinking about that point about church planting or perhaps even staying with Soul Revival that long. But I was studying at Moore Theological College, and we're really encouraged to see a different church to what we'd seen before. So they have this thing called student minister training, which I guess here we call interns as well. And so at that point, I was trying to figure out where do I do an internship at church, at which church. And so I talked to one of our lecturers about it, and he said, oh, these are the few churches that would be really good to train at. He asked me what my criteria was or what I'd seen before and what different things I wanted to see. So he suggested something like 5. The other criteria was it had to be close to public transport, so very practical stuff. So then I went to visit, I think, all the websites of the different churches and then saw Soul Revivals. And I was like, wow, there are a lot of volunteer pastors at this church. I haven't seen that on any other website in some sense. And so I was like, how do they get people to love their church so much that they would spend so much time caring for people? Because workers are busy, right? And so you do serve, but to be a volunteer pastor seems like pretty intense. And then I thought I'd come visit, so I just picked a Saturday night, came to visit.
Awesome.
Thought if I can, I'll catch one of the ministers to talk to them. So I had a really brief but good chat with Stu, and he's like, oh, why don't we talk about this a bit more? And I think that's where it kind of kicked off. I wanted to look at youth and kids in particular, and knew that Soul Revival did that really well because I had no experience with youth and kids. So most of my ministry beforehand had to do with adults, and I became a Christian as an adult too. So what does it look like for the younger generation? So I guess that's why I met Ethan as well.
We hung out doing youth ministry together for a while. It was good fun.
And Braden, who's just popped up behind
He's just arrived.
Hi, Braden.
There he is.
Yeah, and just had the privilege of seeing how you guys ran youth and Fuse. And it was really eye-opening because I have, like, when you're not used to something, you're a bit fearful of it. It's like, what if kids ask me this really weird thing and I can't answer it? Or like, what if they don't like me? And so I think being able to just see you're just loving people and meeting them where they're at and letting other people embrace you too, that was a really, really good experience. And I just remember like a 12-year-old walking up to me and going, oh, hi, and introducing herself and asking me a few questions like, let me introduce you to my mom. She can talk to you more. I'm like, that's really cool. That's the best. So something, you know, the all age, all stage thing and people welcoming each other. That was very special. And I just continued staying on for the 2 years. When the 2 years was up, I was like, oh, I've built friendships here and see really great stuff happening. I'd like to continue to stay in touch. I didn't know what that looked like, so I just mentioned to Stu, oh yeah, Stu, it'd be great to continue to be friends. And then Stu then
Grab hold of that.
Like, takes a sheet of paper and starts drawing circles on them, going, what are the possibilities that could happen? And then I think we just were really on board with the different ideas and the creative stuff that could happen. And so I thought, yeah, why don't I just continue on at Soul Revival Church? And even then it wasn't thinking about planting, but just thinking about, I have relationships in West Ryde, like friendships. I want to do something there. And at the same time, I want to stay connected with Soul Revival. And Soul Revival is very mission-minded and wants to reach the all age, all stage, and wants to reach people of different backgrounds. So how do we do this, and can we do this together? So then I thought it'd be great to have a couple of Christian friends to start something up. My sister Michelle was someone who's very, very keen. So she'd been living in a small country town with just 2,000 people. She was probably one of the few Asians there, also one of the younger people there.
Because she was a doctor out there, right?
She is a doctor out there. She did her training there. But then she went to church there and just made people from all sorts of different ages and backgrounds, so that most of her friends would be in their 70s. And she really enjoyed that.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
That's heaps of fun.
Yeah. And so when she came back, she's like, oh, I love all age, all stage kind of thinking. She came with me to, at that time, Sunday afternoon service at Kirawi. And we then started dreaming up, oh, could we invite our friends who don't know Jesus yet just to hang out with us, spend time. The relational strength is something we thought was really important. And as part of that, the Christians would continue, like in the hour after on a Saturday afternoon, to read the Bible together, because that's what we do as friends. Like we go, this is very core and really beneficial to our friendship to read the Bible together. So the Christians will be doing that. But for people who aren't, you're also welcome to join us. And we'd love you to just kind of explore it. It's very open. There's no background knowledge assumed. And we are actually really interested in hearing from you and your thoughts to give us a fresh perspective, but also really cool to just have a conversation around it, because we are all interested in like the questions of life. So I think we sort of planned it as a more chill, kind of relaxed thing. And we asked Ian along too, and another friend called Bethany. So the four of us have a lot of friends who are not Christian. We thought, let's just bring merge our universes, as Sam Chan would say. So Sam Chan's a well-known Christian speaker at City Bible Forum as well. It's like, let's merge our universes of Christian friends and friends who are not Christian yet, and just get them to mingle so that they can see what it's like doing relationships as Christians. And they came along, and then COVID happened.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes, it did.
So we did one day of dumplings and Our different friends did dumplings together, and then we read the Bible briefly together and had a bit of a discussion, and then ate dumplings.
Sounds good.
Sounds like a fantastic time.
Yeah.
So we're like, oh yeah, just do it socially. And then COVID happened, and then we brought everything onto Zoom. And over Zoom, like, the discussion's different. You can't hang out over Zoom as much.
Yeah.
So I think we were much more intentional. We go, could we play a game beforehand, or could we do an icebreaker? And Ian is the champion at icebreakers, so you
Awesome.
can ask
Good
him
on him.
about that sometime.
We'll get him on the pod.
Definitely will.
Yeah, that's right. And so we would start like with a little social thing. People, I think, were feeling quite isolated, so they'd come and join on Zoom just to see what's happening and also join in some community. And then afterwards, we'd open like part of the Gospel of Luke to read together. That was the other thing. We chose the Gospel of Luke so that it would be bite-sized chunks.
Yeah,
so you could
cool.
have episodes and little
sick.
stories.
Yeah.
So just like Netflix, you can like watch one episode and you can go away with it and make some sense of it. And if you missed one episode, it's okay. People can fill you in, but you'd focus on the next episode. So that's what we wanted
That's really
to do for our friends. And then over Zoom, we started with maybe 6 people. That kind of grew as friends brought friends. And I think like 2 years down the track at our peak during lockdown, we were like 17 people over
That's
Zoom.
mad.
We're like, how do we do this?
How did we grow during COVID? It would be my question. But
It's outrageous.
that's amazing. It's
Yeah,
fantastic.
I mean, the work of God. And
Yeah.
I guess some insight would be that maybe people were feeling like there were no other activities at that point in time. There was a point of connection, social connection. And also like just talking about more important questions when you're in a time like a pandemic, before you just brush those questions aside, but they're brought to the forefront during hard times.
Yeah, totally. And then so how did it lead to actually, I mean, that's how the gathering started, right? But then it's like, we want to ramp this up more and more.
Yeah.
What were the steps that you decided to take? And I do apologize for leaving Bethany and Michelle out of saying that you guys were behind the driving
OGs.
force. So I do apologize. I love Michelle because I had a great chat with her when I went over to West Ryde. What were the next kind of steps? Like, was it, we want to figure out how to do this once we can go back to meeting together? Like, we had a number of lockdowns and all that kind of thing.
Yeah.
Was it like, we want to make this now, if we've grown to 17 people, like there's something happening here. Like, let's push the accelerator. What was the decisions?
I think there were ongoing kind of decisions, and the wonderful thing was Stu kept meeting with us very regularly. So I know that Michelle and Ian were doing Berea online with Braden and with Stu. So I think every Monday night they'd meet together. And so while Ian and Michelle were still fairly new to Soul Revival, there was this onboarding process that was happening. The relationships were being built. So that was very helpful to kind of move us more towards setting up a gathering. And I think instead of seeing a gathering as something that like it's a project, but at the same time, it's more about the people. And so building that relational strength was really, really important. And with Stu meeting with us then when Louisa and Wayne came on board every Wednesday evening, that was really, really fantastic, because then he gave us the steps of how it would work, gave us some training, and also helped us to work through things ourselves and think through things so that we could wrestle with that and go, do we actually plant? Do we not plant? Do we need something that's a little bit more stable? How can we build structures so that they actually serve our people? And that helps us to love people better.
I just love it. Thank you. It's such a blessing to our church. I was just going to say, now you've actually have a venue.
Yeah.
I mean, last time when I came, it was in your lounge room. Is that correct? But now you have a venue. Talk us through that and what's exciting about that and where you see it going now.
Yeah, the lounge room was very special because it felt like a friendship gathering or a family gathering.
Yeah.
But then we ran out of space.
Yeah.
So that's the special thing about having a venue, which means that we have a space that could fit maybe 70, 80 people. And that's very exciting because then you see new possibilities. You don't go, maybe I shouldn't invite my friend this week because they feel like there's no social distancing.
Yeah.
You go, wow, there's space. And so I'll be very intentional now about inviting my friends rather than holding back and being more passive. Yeah, because there were definitely people who were interested and went, oh, can I come? And you're like, sure, but I'll try
we're out
and
of
manage the
chairs.
numbers.
Yeah.
Like maybe can we wait till next week for like Ian's friend to come and my friend comes this week. Whereas now it's like, doesn't matter because we have
Right.
space.
That's cool.
sick. That's really exciting.
Fantastic. Before I ask the final question, Ethan, do you have anything else to add of great?
My only
Ask of
addition
grace?
is that I'm really encouraged, and
Yep.
that's all I got, I think.
Yeah.
And I think having a venue is really exciting, and yes, it comes with more challenges because it might not feel as homely, for example. But I think what you said before was really true, and it's not about, at the end of the day, the project. It is about those relationships and building that team of friends that together.
Doing
Like,
ministry as a team and as friends.
Yeah, I think it comes back to that belonging thing.
Yeah.
Of like you actually end up, yes, you're not at your house anymore, but you guys actually belong together because you all belong to Jesus.
Yeah.
And so something we talk about a lot at Soul Revival is that we're trying to be a friendship group that invites everyone to be a part of that friendship group. And I think that's a really encouraging thing to be seeing happen. That was right. And yeah, I'm just really encouraged by that, and I'm really excited that you literally, like, a few sentences in were like, my story has me struggling for belonging, and you've concluded with, I'm putting words in your mouth, but it's really cool to see that there is a space, whether it be City Bible Forum and Soul Revival, and there's lots of spaces where you may feel like you belong, and I think that's really cool and really exciting.
Yeah, I think there's no place that you might feel you fully belong, because in a sense we're all temporarily here, and we know we belong with Jesus and we'll be with him in heaven forever. That's your ultimate sense of belonging. But in this temporary space, we can be much more relaxed about belonging, and we can actually make the effort to help people feel like they belong because they can get to know Jesus as well. And I think one maybe final thing to add from my perspective is also the fact that we belong to each other in such creative ways. Like I love how that we don't see geography as a boundary, but we go like, okay, there's this team in West Ryde, and there's this team in Kirrawee, Yarrawara, Cronulla, but we're somehow using creative ways with modern technology now to still stay connected and belong with one another. And I love how you guys make that happen with like the digital team going, oh yeah, we can do a live stream. And that's how we can then take steps in our church planting to not say we need to go live immediately, but we can live stream from Kirrawee, and we have a group of people that are mutually encouraging each other in Christ and can talk about the sermon later. But we don't have to do all the work. We can be creative in starting to build around people because we have extra resources by doing stuff together.
Yeah. No, that's a really good point. I think the low-key, long-term relational it really helps with that, and building as friends and step by step. That makes a lot of sense what you're saying there. And to hear it from your perspective, I'm like, oh yes. And like, because when we planted the church, it was just 30 of us, and we'd kind of done ministry together for a long time and all that kind of thing.
Friends, right?
Yeah, as friends. And I think as we have grown as a church, we've had to continually adapt our ways of how we're doing things. And the West Ryde gathering is just one of those examples, but also like with our different church plants and stuff as well. It's that how do we, that's something we always talk about, is theology, strategy and practice, and theology always stays the same. Our strategy is we want to be intergenerational, all age, all stage, sharing the love and truth of Jesus, but then our practice is a thing that can change all the time. And that allows us, having that flexible practice allows us to be able to do things like you were talking about, or try and experiment things with things, and then go, nope, this didn't work, come back and we'll try it again. And I think I think we're in a really exciting moment as a church as COVID seems to be subsiding. I'm not saying it's going away, but it seems to be subsiding. I think it's a really exciting period of church that we're coming into.
Oh yeah.
Anyway, enough about me talking about it. The final question, Grace, is if you look back over the history of your life so far, what would you like to tell your younger Christian self?
I think it'd be just that I think sticking with the theme of belonging, that I didn't need to stress so much to work so hard at belonging, and to, instead of continuing to look inside of myself, to look outwards a lot more. Because I think when we help other people feel like they belong, we kind of automatically belong or are included as well. So from that self-centered kind of perspective of, am I fitting in? Am I belonging? Am I cool enough? Am I smart enough? Am I achieving enough? Like, I think if I could just free up that headspace to go, how can I love the other person in front of me?
Yep.
How can I serve them? How can I make them feel comfortable and safe? That would have been so much more liberating, and also so much better for relationships. I wouldn't have been as isolated or felt as isolated, and the other person wouldn't have as well. And so better connections could have been formed that way.
Yeah, totally. And you spoke about that in terms of being jealous or upset that other people did better than you. So that makes a lot of sense.
Like we could do much more together if I had valued the other person's strengths rather than competing with them.
And have a heart to serve them as well. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Well, I think that's a good time to end the podcast.
Fully.
Thank you so much. We feel
We
feel very blessed by your presence on the podcast. So thank you so much, Grace. We loved hearing your story.
Mm-hmm.
But I thought that what was interesting though is that you spoke a lot about belonging and trying to find your sense of belonging. But I think also as you found your identity in Jesus and knowing that Jesus was your savior, I think it shows us that you are actually a unique individual and you've had all these different experiences that have obviously contributed to trying to find that sense of belonging, but also shaped you into a really effective but also lovely, unique individual person. And I think that's what you belong here with us. That's what I'm trying to say, is that we love having you here. So thank you so much for telling us your story and being honest about things and saying that you still struggle with being belonging and finding that sense of belonging. But it's lovely to have you here, and we just want to keep loving you and encouraging you. So thank you so much.
Thanks for that, feeling the love. And thank you for helping me feel like I belong and reminding me of those truths too.
Yeah, no worries at all. Thank you so much. Well, we always finish with a one way at the end of the podcast. So shall we wrap up the chips?
Just wrap it up.
Wrapped up the chips, and we'll finish with a one way. So thank you, Grace. And thank you everyone for listening. One way.
One way.